Hello, and I'm glad to meet you all on this webinar. I hope we have a great discussion today. So my name is FATEMEH FARIVAR. I'm the Deputy Director of Iran-Eurica, Iranian Institute for European and American Studies. At Iran-Eurica was founded in 2015 and by a group of former diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and distinguished university professors. Here at the Institute, we're trying to conduct policy research about European countries and North American and Latin American countries. And we hold events and such as this event with partner institutes in Europe and other countries. And so I think it's a good coincidence that the webinar is held on the same day that the negotiations for revival of JCPOA are being held in Vienna. And I hope that our discussion can be productive about regional issues, peace and geopolitics in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fareva, for this nice introduction. Yes, it's going to be a webinar. The topic is peace, geopolitics, and nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. It was already mentioned that exactly today, the negotiations on the Iran nuclear agreement, the so-called JCPOA, will resume in Vienna after, as we all know, the US left it in 2018 unilaterally. However, I think it's also important that the Middle East faces various challenges. I mean, recently we saw the withdrawal of the US troops from Afghanistan. There's a war in Syria and in Yemen. There's instability in Iraq, but there are also other global challenges like climate change, migration, terrorism, and IDPs and refugees in the region. So I would like to start with SWOBODA for the next 7 to 10 minutes. Every speaker has around 7 to 10 minutes so that we also still have time for a discussion afterwards. I mentioned I will be moderating, so I will always go through the questions and post them afterwards. So Hannes, I would like to start with you. I already introduced you. You're the president of our institute. And I would like to start more with a geopolitical overview. I mean, I already mentioned Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, but there's also a very difficult relationship with Israel in the region. But there has been prospects also when it comes, Abraham Accords were introduced in the last 2 years. So my question to you would be, like in general, how do you assess the situation today in the Middle East when it comes to peace and also stability in the region? What role does non-proliferation still play? Is it important? And what could the European Union do in order to be a geopolitical one, as it was said in the last global strategy? Does it have this power or this transformative power? So the role of the European Union in the Middle East, but also a geopolitical overview for peace and stability. The next 7 to 10 minutes are yours.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, dear colleagues. What I want to present, of course, is my personal views and perceptions. If we look to the region as a whole, it's still very fragile. It's probably one of the most conflictuous region we have. Syria, the war is still not over, still fighting going on. Turkey is still occupying a small area of the country. Iraq, we always have again and again sectarian splits and divisions and fightings. There is no real peace. And there are, even in the Kurdish region, there are conflicts between the different Kurdish groups and, of course, between the central authorities. Lebanon is a disaster if you look at it politically and economically. One can say it's a failed state or nearly a failed state in many respects. And I don't see really any political force who is trying to solve the issues and bring the people together. They are still very much divided. The new government in Israel, unfortunately, has no interest or no idea how to solve the Palestinian question. And I think solving with all the details we can discuss is, of course, to come back to the original UN resolution, which envisaged 2 separate states, 2 independent states, and we are far away than ever. If we look to the, but Israel, of course, was successful in the sense that it had started diplomatic relations, official diplomatic relations with the Emirates and with Morocco. And, you know, with the Abraham Accords, it gave it a stronger position in the region. Israel today is more embedded in the whole region than it was ever before. And also with Jordan, it has now an agreement about electricity against water. So we have to make that clear for us what it means. There are attacks, Hamas attacks in Israel retaliation, you know, by far stronger than the attacks of Hamas, but nevertheless, you don't see that this war between Israel and Hamas, if you may call it a war, is not leading anywhere more towards peace and stability. We have the war in Yemen still going on, people killing, big destructions. So there is no chance of a peace for the moment, at least. And if you look to the Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, they are quite active in Yemen, they are active in Libya without big success. So my conclusion is that this kind of situation we have in the Middle East with the different powers and countries trying to gain more influence, directly or indirectly, think about Iran directly or indirectly with Hezbollah, is not really leading nowhere. You have killings, destructions, disturbances, but you don't have some idea how to bring the countries together with these very diverse, of course, ideas. But if some steps have been taken, it's rather steps between Israel and the Arab countries. And I don't see any, let's be very frank, because I think we should discuss frank, how Iran is coming into the play, how Iran is really going to influence that situation. Now, I think I always thought that the question of the nuclear arms or the nuclear issue for Iran is one of the prime important issues, but it's not the only one. And I think, and I hope, of course, that the negotiations which started today, or will start today in Vienna, will bring some success step by step, not on one day. And I hope, of course, that what the damage Trump has done will be, overcome by a new agreement, by old agreement, maybe with some new elements in it, we will see. Of course, I can understand also what just read the article of the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran in today's Financial Times, when he writes, Iran nuclear talks must address the removal of sanctions. Of course, this is very important that sanctions will be lifted. Of course, this article is a bit ambivalent, as we saw in the discussion that the last time. It's not only about sanctions. Of course, it's also about the nuclear issue and about the preparation of Iran to go further in preparing at least a situation, a threshold from where they could, in case it is necessary, develop nuclear arms. Everybody who's really looking into the situation also from the West is not thinking that Iran really wants to go directed to the development of nuclear arms, but, and I can understand that. And also my talks in the past already in Iran showed there is an interest to go as far as possible in order, if there is danger for Iran itself, to go into that direction, of course, of producing it. I think, and I don't want to go in too much into detail because that's up also to Heinz Gavner, who is an expert on that. I think the whole nuclear issue should be embedded in an approach of a nuclear arms-free zone in the Middle East as a whole. I know it's not easy. I know that Israel will not say, okay, let's negotiate about that. But I think this must be one of the framework where the European Union should be even stronger than it is. It has some declaration, that direction, should really act. We don't want any nuclear arms in the Middle East by no country. Of course, any further addition of nuclear arms would even endanger the situation, because if it's Iran, then it's also Saudi Arabia, it can be Egypt, and we know that in the Trump administration, there were already some ideas about going in the direction with Saudi Arabia. But I think what is really necessary is a nuclear arms-free zone in the Middle East. And the second point I just want to make it very clear, I think the concentration of all the countries, including Iran, should be on competition in areas where we see the countries who are successful. Of course, Israel has been successful also because of the arms issue, not only the nuclear arms, but the support in the armament by the US and other countries. But I think the countries like Israel, like Dubai or the Emirates, they are successful because they concentrated on technology and bringing new developments. And now, especially with the climate change, I think all the countries, and Iran is one of the countries who is very much affected by climate change, they have to concentrate on the issues, the challenges for the citizens, and that is in the region, the climate change, that is energy beyond the question of nuclear energy or energy from oil and gas. And there are, of course, other issues with Iran. Think about the refugees, which is an enormous burden also for Iran when we look from the refugees from Afghanistan. So I think the concentration of all the countries must be much more on solving the day-to-day issues of the citizens. And that is, of course, on the climate change, that is with the refugees, and that is, of course, to find new ways how to overcome by new technology, by new orientation, these issues which are here. So and this is my last word, is recognize the importance of the nuclear issue. I don't deny, of course, the question of the competition, the political competition, power competition between the different countries in the region. But I think peace only can be reached if there's more concentration on the issues ordinary citizens are concerned about, and that is for today, especially also climate change. And that needs, of course, also new technologies to overcome some of the basic issues from health to climate change. This would be my conclusion from the whole situation in the Middle East, what I can do in some minutes. And thank you for your attention. And I'm open, of course, for any questions and counter arguments.
Thank you very much, Hannes. I think you mentioned many topics. You talked about disarmament in general and nuclear weapon-free zone. We know how difficult that is going to be, especially since you mentioned Israel. But you also said Israel at least managed with some Arab countries to normalize a little bit the relationships. But I think it's super important what you also said, that climate change. I mean, we need to look for a room of cooperation. And this would be the question to our next speaker. His name is ANVARI. He's from the Iranian Institute for European and American Studies, now in Tehran. Welcome. I'm very happy that that you are able to speak today. He will be speaking in German, so I will try then afterwards maybe to summarize very briefly in English as well. But I think that most of our guests do know German, at least from the participants. So, Saeed, room for cooperation, Möglichkeiten zur Kooperation zwischen Iran und der EU. Please, the next 7 to 10 minutes, die nächsten 7 bis 10 Minuten, floor is yours.
Vielen Dank, Stefanie. Guten Tag. Hören Sie mich jetzt, oder?
Ja, ja.
Also, herzliche Grüße aus Teheran. Ich versuche, also Deutsch zu sprechen. Ich versuche, mich auf Deutsch verständlich zu machen. Ich heiße Saeed Anvari. Seit 4 Jahren arbeite ich hier in diesem Institut, im Iranischen Institut für die europäischen und amerikanischen Studien. Zurzeit promoviere ich an der Staatlichen Universität Teheran, in den regionalen Studien, und zurzeit verfasse ich meine Doktorarbeit zum Thema Beziehungen zwischen Russland und Europa. Okay. In meiner heutigen Präsentation geht es um um die Kooperationsmöglichkeiten zwischen dem Iran und dem Europa in Frage der Sicherheit und auch in Frage der Energie. Also ich versuche es in 5, 7 Minuten zusammenzufassen. Der erste Punkt ist, dass es eine gegenseitige Abhängigkeit gibt zwischen der Stabilität und Sicherheit in unserer Region, also im Nahen und Mittleren Osten, und der Sicherheit in Europa.
Yes?
Entschuldigung, hören Sie mich jetzt?
Jetzt wieder.
Ja?
Ja.
Okay, also das heißt, was die Sicherheit und Stabilität unserer Region gefährdet, kann auch die Sicherheit von Europa gefährden. Das bedeutet also, es steht auch im Interesse der europäischen Länder, dass es in unserer Region im Nahen und Mittleren Osten Stabilität und Sicherheit herrscht. Ich bin der Meinung, dass diese Sicherheit, diese Stabilität wirklich eine objektive, eine materielle Basis braucht. Das bedeutet also, wir haben in unserer Region die Länder dieser Region, egal ob sie Monarchien oder Republiken sind, egal ob sie also von den Islamisten oder nicht-Islamisten Kräften regiert werden, sind betroffen von materiellen, objektiven Problemen. Egal, was für Identitäten sie haben, egal, also von welchen Ideologien sie ausgeprägt sind. Das sind, also Sie haben das schon erwähnt, das ist die Frage der Energie, das ist also Klimawandel, das ist also die Energieinfrastrukturen, die wirklich veraltet sind. Und das kann also dazu führen, das kann auch dazu führen, dass diese Länder das wirklich hautnah fühlen können, dass sie von gemeinsamen Problemen, von den gleichen Problemen betroffen sind. Das ist ein wichtiger Punkt. Dann kann man sagen, wenn alle Länder dieser Region davon überzeugt sind, dass sie durch eine Kooperation, durch eine Zusammenarbeit ihre Energieinfrastrukturen neu aufbauen können, das kann dazu führen, dass sie gemeinsame Interessen dann haben. Ich meine, wenn zum Beispiel Iran und Saudi-Arabien, also Vereinigten Arabischen Emiraten, gemeinsame Energiequellen haben, ich meine besonders die erneuerbaren Energiequellen. Wenn sie gemeinsame Interesse haben, wenn ihre Wirtschaftssysteme miteinander verbunden sind, dann ist die Gefahr und die Wahrscheinlichkeit wirklich niedriger, dass diese Länder gegeneinander Kriege führen. Und das kann auch zur Stärkung der Stabilität und Frieden in dieser Region führen. Diejenigen, also die Länder, die gemeinsame Interessen haben, die gemeinsamen Energiequellen haben, dann führen wahrscheinlich kein Krieg gegeneinander. Und was ist dann also die Rolle von den europäischen Ländern? Ich kann es so sagen, dass, okay, für die Förderung des Friedens und der Stabilität in dieser Region brauchen wir eine objektive, eine materielle Basis. Wenn die europäischen Länder versuchen, die Wirtschaftssysteme der regionalen Mächte, ich meine also Iran, Saudi-Arabien, Katar, Kuwait und so weiter, miteinander zu verbinden. Ich meine, wenn wenn Europa auch zwischen dem Iran und den Machtrivalen und den Machtkonkurrenten von Iran irgendwie vermitteln kann, wenn sie miteinander über die Zukunftsperspektive der Energie in dieser Region verhandeln können, dann kann Europa die Wirtschaftssysteme dieser Länder miteinander verbinden. Dann können sie gemeinsame Konzerne und also Unternehmen gründen, bauen, weil Europa über die moderne Technologie der erneuerbaren Energien verfügt, kann diese Technik, dieses Know-how in dieser Region ausliefern. Und es ist auch zugunsten der regionalen Länder, diese moderne Technologie in ihren Ländern zu installieren und davon zu profitieren. Also wissen Sie, im Atomabkommen und in den Verhandlungen, die zurzeit zum Beispiel gemacht wird und seit also 2015 und auch schon vorher, ist von der iranischen Seite gab es und gibt es eine große Forderung, dass Iran von diesem Abkommen profitieren muss. Wenn es nicht der Fall ist, dann bedeutet es wirklich nicht, dass Iran seine Verantwortungen erfüllt. Und wenn die Verhandlungen im Rahmen wenn die Gespräche im Rahmen der Verhandlungen, die zurzeit in Wien oder in Europa im Gang sind, dazu führt, dass es auch zwischen Iran und seinen Nachbarländern eine Einigung erreicht wird, die sich auf die Frage der Energie bezieht. Und wenn die Europäische Union dabei eine wichtige Rolle spielt, dann können wir sagen, dass die Sicherheit dieser Region gewährleistet und garantiert wird. Das ist auch im Interesse der Islamischen Republik Iran, auch im Interesse der regionalen Länder. Und wenn wir diese Basis schaffen, ich meine eine materielle, objektive Basis schaffen, dann kann auch dazu beitragen, dazu führen, dass weniger zum Beispiel Migranten und Flüchtlinge also Richtung Europa gehen. Das ist auch zugunsten der europäischen Region. Ja, zusammenfassend lässt sich sagen, dass Iran, seine Nachbarländer und die Europäische Union in Frage der Energie und Sicherheit von den gleichen Problemen betroffen sind und auch nach gemeinsamen Lösungen suchen sollen. Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Herzlichen Dank. Thank you very much. Maybe very quickly for our English speakers, Mr. Anvari was especially talking about that security in the Middle East is also important for the European Union, and that there are common objectives and common objective problems which are actually even independent of the political and religious background. One of this could be the energy sector, and at the heart of your presentation, there is the conviction that cooperation can actually create even common interests, for example, in the renewable energy sector, that could be a common interest, and that the European Union could play a mediating role, for example, between the conflicting neighboring states in the region. And maybe a last point you also said, and I think it's also, of course, important, and I guess that Heinz will later talk about it, is also that when it comes to the nuclear deal, when it comes to the JCPOA, that of course Iran also needs to profit in one way or another from it. Otherwise, it's going to be, I would say, going to fail most probably. Thank you so much, and maybe also now to the participants, if you have questions, you can already post them in the chat. I will go through them once the speakers are speaking. But let's now.
Danke, ich höre gern dann Ihre Fragen und Ihre Kommentare. Vielen Dank.
Yes, thank you so much. Our next speaker, and I would also like to welcome him very much, is Mustafa Kamrani. He's also from the Iranian Institute for European and American Studies. And the question is actually a similar one. What are the prospects for the Iranian-European cooperation in the Middle East? What do you think, and where are the changes? But maybe you can also talk a little bit about the domestic situation, because we all know that there has been a change of government. I mean, there's a new president in Iran that happened only a few months ago. This was also during the last round of the talks. So who are the spoilers, maybe also when it comes to Iran domestically, but what is also the big prospect for Iranian-European cooperation? Thank you very much for joining, and the floor is yours, Mr. Kamrani.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My special hello to the panelists, and also everyone who is generating such a meeting between, and this joint venture between Iran-Eurica and IIP in Vienna. So to be looking at this issue, I was always thinking that maybe the West is trying to securitize the issue of nuclear a bit. And this is how things are getting a little maybe out of hands. As we probably know, there are more important issues in the region that is happening, which can be both a shared threat between the Middle East and Europe. Also, these issues can be thought through by actually both parties, and they can be seen as opportunities for cooperation. This is why, in my opinion, after analyzing and seeing what is coming up through in the region, in the Middle East, what we conclude is that we have more important issues like the issue of Afghanistan or Iraq, or the United States actors who are actually destabilizing the region for a bit. And at the same time, this would lead into economic crisis and maybe the crisis for the migration. And in the issue of Afghanistan, and in this case, we have the problem with the narcotics, and while it's being actually smuggled, exported even to Europe as well. So maybe securitizing the some other issues, rather than these more important issues that need to be considered by the West, makes them a little, actually things getting out of hands. And that's why, first and foremost, it is, to my understanding, that the most important thing for the West is trying to change approach. And the other thing is, if we are taking this region of the Middle East as an example of the bigger system or the bigger regime in the world, and then we are trying to apply the theory of balance of power into it, sometimes the West is trying to probably actually change it or make it change. We already know that the arms sale from European states, including actually Britain, into the Middle East increased so much. Just I was looking at the statistics from 2016 to 2020, only 24th of the Europe's arm export was to the Middle East, and this would prove otherwise, that the balance of power is what needed in here. And at the same time, when we are actually shifting these things away, this makes us, we are not looking at the security issues that really happen in the Middle East. And in this case, if we want to talk about things more domestically, we can see that Iran is, and has always been a land for diplomacy, and they were always trying to talk about things with the West, whatever it comes with next. And even if the idea of having nuclear power was becoming a security issue for the West, and we're trying to impose the sanctions and everything on Iran, the thing happened was that Iran actually tried to solve the issue. And this is what they're trying to do, of course, and this is their will, in so many cases. And speaking of actually to answer to that part of your question, you were saying about the domestic effects of this one. Iranians in 2015, they were more optimistic towards the deal. And when I'm talking about Iranians, I can talk both of the people and the political elites who were thinking of sanctions removal, and the tangible outcome would be there, and this would be great for the economy of the country. However, when things go by and people saw this issue with the US withdrawal and how it happens and how Iran was left alone, and they couldn't even actually request for a loan from the IMF in the actually outbreak of COVID-19. This would actually maybe distrust Iranian people to see that actually we need to be having second thought about it. Maybe nobody after all is thinking about what we are going through. And this is, I think, an opportunity as well for both parties, especially for the Europe, to be actually doing a great job. And while people are losing their hope in the United States or in some other international regimes that they cannot support us, maybe this is a good opportunity for Europe to step in and try to go for the support of the people. And the other part of the question you were asking about if there is any probable change in the idea, I can say, well, this has always become the mere diplomacy of the Islamic Republic to be actually to going for this nuclear power for peaceful purposes. And a change of government usually does not change this kind of thing, because this is a unilateral, it's actually a kind of unanimous decision, which is actually there for everybody. And people, and actually the governments, when they are changing, the things are not changed in this way. Anyway, the new government is actually open-minded in this case, and we are trying to see that if the negotiations will probably give the best outcome possible. And the unfortunate thing is that the deal could be easily spoiled if the outcome is not parties are expecting. And especially Iranian people, they are actually thinking about this case, that the outcome of the deal would mean what the West is really thinking, and if what they're saying and what they're doing is the same or different. This is why I think maybe a very good opportunity for both parties, especially the Europe, to step in and to go for the support of the people. So I don't know if you have any more things or comments to say, but this is probably everything I was trying to say.
Thank you very much. I think it was very interesting, and it also leads very well, I think, to our next speaker. But you also talked about the securitization of many issues. I mean, that's definitely something we are also facing. You also said about economic crisis, migration, arms sales, the situation in Afghanistan. There are many different issues on table, of course. But of course, I mean, the nuclear deal in the end is what is important for Iran, I'm guessing, is of course then the lifting of sanctions, so that in the end the people could profit from it. And we know from the past that this did not happen up to the expectations people were actually having. So let me now go to our next speaker, Heinz Gavner, who is a professor of political sciences and also chair of the advisory board of the International Institute for Peace, and also the main person organizing this event because it just recently traveled to Iran. Heinz, you've been following the talks in Vienna for the last years since the very beginning. And the question would be, up to what you heard until now, what is the state of play of the JCPOA today? What are the major changes? What will it be? Will an arrangement be agreed upon? Will it be like the one in 2015? How to deal with the problems of lifting all sanctions before? And this is, I mean, what Iran is requesting on the one hand, and on the other hand, then they are also requesting something like a guarantee for also the future governments to come in the US so that they cannot unilaterally withdraw again. So there are many problems on the table. The talks are resuming today here in Vienna, so we're right on spot. And please just give me your, what do you think? What is the state of play and your 7 to 10 minutes?
Thank you, Stephanie. You put the really right questions and I will address them, but let me first thank the Institute Eurica and also the IEB to organize this event so timely, because as we speak, the negotiations are resuming here in Vienna. And some say it was, this event here was accidental, that it was at the same day when the negotiations start. I would say it was a bit intentionally as well to do so. The real question here, where to start? Where will the negotiations start? Will they start where the delegations left in June? Or will they restart all over again? So this is the big question the delegations will have to address it at the beginning. Iran is coming because we have the new government and they want to have a new approach and they want to be different from the former government. So they requested to move the negotiations from the old hotel to the new hotel in the Coburg. First of all, to show that there is a difference. Second of all, to demonstrate that they want to go back to 2015. That's the goal for the Iranian delegation. And of course, in the Coburg, in the hotel in 2015, there was this agreement on the JCPOA. However, when we speak and say a new approach, I do not see that Iran is going to discard all what has been achieved already in the 6 rounds of talks from April to June. Much has been achieved. There have been 3 baskets established. One about the lifting of sanctions, one about Iran's nuclear program, how to roll it back to 2015, and the 3rd basket about the implementation. I guess that's the main sticking point, how to implement an agreement. Much has been achieved. For example, there was the US delegation already agreed that about 1,000 sanctions will be lifted with an economic impact on the Iranian economy. Actually, it would be sufficient to give the Iranian economy a big boost if you just think in economic terms. Iran, as Stephanie mentioned already, and also Hannes was referring to it, now requests that all sanctions would be lifted before Iran would take some steps by itself. So the reason cannot be economically, because the old text of June would already give a very big economic incentive for Iran. So the point is that Iran wants the sanctions to be removed because of pride and because of dignity, because it doesn't want to be sanctioned. And that is difficult to negotiate, of course. The Americans will not unilaterally remove all the sanctions before Iran takes some steps, so it will keep some leverage. But looking back to the text, about 90% of the text has been already negotiated until June. If you look at the text, there are already some suggestions how to implement a technical diplomatic mechanism, an agreement. So it need not be, I know Iran is rejecting a step-by-step solution, but there are several other possibilities which are technically, I could speak about it later in the Q&A maybe. You can just put packages so that nobody needs to be the first or the second to implement an agreement. Secondly, of course, the second stumbling block is Iran, which is very understandable. I really understand this, wants to have guarantees from the US that the next president would not renege again from the Iran, and actually the world had bad experience with the 2018 withdrawal Trump administration. And it's understandable that Iran doesn't want to going to happen again. And anyway, the American political system does not allow this unless there's a 2/3 majority in the Congress that you can really have not only an agreement but a treaty. And still, it's understandable that Iran is still some suspicious because not even President Biden did give a firm guarantee that he would stay in the deal. What he easily could do with presidential directives. Also, Europeans could step in and say, if the US withdraws again, we will give these guarantees. There are probably many mechanisms how the Europeans could do is expand the index mechanism, implement the blocking statute, etc., etc. Could be several, but the Europeans didn't do so. So also the Europeans could request from the Americans, from the Biden administration, to remove the secondary sanctions which are imposed on European companies if they do business with Iran. What Iran could do is use the time. So it would be in the interest of Iran to have a quick conclusion here of the talks, because Iran could, much time has been lost already. It's both sides are to blame, all sides are to blame, US, Europeans, and also Iran. Much time has been lost. But Iran could use the remaining time of the Biden administration to negotiate contracts with international companies which have a longer duration than the Biden administration, 10 years, 15 years. So it is very unlikely, it's possible, but it's very unlikely that the next president will terminate these contracts, especially if the European companies, the European companies would abide by it. So, but there are two more issues which the Europeans and especially the American hawks always would include in the GCPOA. That's the regional behavior. So that's something what the Secretary of State Pompeo brought up in his 12 points, and it doesn't disappear. Trump disappeared, Pompeo disappeared. This request is still there. You cannot include behavior in an arms control treaty. First of all, there, as Hannes explained, and also Mustafa, there are many destabilizing actors and actions in the region. So it's not just to single out Iran, but you cannot include behavior in the GCPOA. We wouldn't have any arms control agreement during the Cold War with the Soviet Union if the West would have included Soviet behavior in the world. So that's just stupid, I have to say, to request it to include behavior. Second, the missile issue. So the rest always is we have to include the missiles in the GCPOA. Also, there is no arms control agreement which singles out only one party. So if it is discussing missiles, has to be done on a regional basis. And of course, also Saudi Arabia, for example, has already missiles with a longer range than the Iranian missiles are. So there have to be regional arms control negotiations to address this, but not to put in right away into the GCPOA. So in that sense, Iran is correct that we should go back to the 2015 agreement. Of course, there is this problem of that Iran made advances in their nuclear program, have new modern centrifuges, and there is this issue with the IAEA that there's not entire access for the IAEA to some nuclear sites. These are technical issues which have political implications. This can be solved, and also the negotiations until June had some mechanisms how to deal with the centrifuges, for example. You can mothball them. You can balance them with the duration of the provisions. So there is a technical possibility to solve this. So you can just put it put it in the negotiations for political reasons, but you can solve them with technical means. So let me just finish, Stephanie. I will map out two scenarios very briefly, a worst case scenario and a best case scenario that we can discuss. The worst case scenario is if there is no agreement here in Vienna, if we don't have a GCPOA. Iran will continue to enhance its nuclear program, maybe not get a nuclear bomb, but even might threaten there's a possibility to leave the non-proliferation treaty. But that would be sufficient for Israel to cry foul and say, we knew it all along, Iran is hiding that they're building the bomb anyway. So, and Prime Minister Bennett and President Biden already talked about an option B if there's no negotiation. Option B means military strikes. So Israel might start what actually Israel admits openly, military strikes also on facilities within Iran. It will try to draw the Americans in as well. Americans will not send ground troops because Afghanistan, but it will give support, intelligence, surveillance, military strikes, drones. Iran has to respond somehow. Iran will respond asymmetrically because open war is bad for Iran as well because its conventional forces are not sufficient enough. So then we will have an open, destabilizing situation, even military conflict in the war. So much depends here in Vienna whether we have stability or more stability in the Middle East or not. Second scenario, we'll end with that, Stephanie. Actually, all sides say they want to have an agreement. So whether it's the three Europeans, Iran, US, also Russia and China, all say all would benefit if there is an agreement. First of all, the fear of proliferation in the Middle East would be stopped, at least curbed. Second, economically, all would be benefit, especially Iran when the sanctions are lifted, but also trade, especially with Europe and Iran, would increase, investment would increase, and there would be, as SAEED talked at the beginning, saying this atmosphere of cooperation would be beneficial for all of the participants. So for reasonable arguments, we could say there is no reason not to have an agreement. But stumbling blocks, as I mapped out, are still there. And hopefully Vienna will come to a conclusion. Otherwise, it will be a disaster situation in the Middle East. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Heinz, for giving us the state of play of the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal. Yeah, you said that it's a huge problem. On the one hand, the issues about sanctions, but then again, the regional behavior, which is wanted to be included quite impossibly, the missiles issue. But I think the most important thing is that, as you said, that if there is no deal, it's not really helping stability. And in the end, everyone wants a deal, and there could rise something like a spirit of cooperation if the parties manage to go back. You also mentioned, I think it was mentioned before already by Mr. Kamrani about this whole idea of securitization. And I mean, and I'm very happy now also to present our next speaker. His name is Mohsen Hadian. He's also from the Iranian Institute for European and American Studies. And he will be more talking now about what is going on now in Iran when it comes to the eastern part, when it comes to Afghanistan. I mean, we all know that in August with the withdrawal, the attention went back to Afghanistan. Nobody really knows how to deal with it. Are the Taliban in power. The European Union does not really know how to deal with the Taliban, especially due to their humanitarian situation there, but also their approach when it comes to human rights, which makes it very difficult for the European Union to even talk to the now leading Taliban in Afghanistan. So, Mr. Mohsen Hadian, how do you assess the situation? And it's a big neighbor of Iran. Iran already had and always had many refugees from there. There's a Shia population in Afghanistan. So what would you say? What can Europe do? What is Europe doing in the region? And what are also Iran's interests when it comes to the situation between Iran and Afghanistan? The floor is yours.
Guten Tag, everybody. I'm Mohsen Hadian, and I'm in charge of the US-Iran relations desk at the Iran-Eurica. Well, actually, I prepared a presentation for this event. If Stephanie kindly allows sharing the screen, I can present from the PowerPoint I've prepared. But if not, I can just move on.
No, it should be fine. Luca, can you share the screen?
Yeah. Stephanie, do you have the screen?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, we see it.
Okay. So, well, once discussing Iranian-European cooperation, we have to pass historical concept regarding the situation. One of the earliest examples of cooperation between Iran and Europe was during the Safavid era, where Robert Shirley attempted to modernize the Persian armies, which were outgunned by the Ottoman Turks, because of shared interests between the Europeans, the Habsburgs, the Commonwealth, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and other states, or the Venetians. As we move on, in the 19th century, as the Russian state begins to expand, once again, Iran seeks cooperation with the French and subsequently the British in order to modernize its armies to face the Russian invasion in the northern western borders of Iran. However, this time it didn't end up as good as the previous time, but still Iran gained some experience cooperating with European parties. Once we move on to the topic of Afghanistan, which is quite a contemporary issue, Tehran and Washington considered Al-Qaeda and the Taliban as ideological enemies. Therefore, they decided to cooperate in the Conference of Bonn, 2001, December 2001. And Iran was appealed to approach the US, the Americans, for broader engagement. However, once Iran was labeled as axis of evil, this attempt failed. So we have a history of Iran and the United States cooperating on state building in Afghanistan and making arrangements regarding power. At the same time, meanwhile, we have the nuclear negotiations in Tehran. And in fact, President Rouhani, which was then chair of the National Security Council of Iran, struck a deal with the E3, which was an interim deal in 2003 that lasted till 2006. However, the European Party didn't hold up with its commitments. The present, well, we move back to Afghanistan. What we have in Afghanistan is various analysts explaining that the Taliban has not denounced or rejected its methods or ideology. We have various analysts reporting about ideological and operational ties between the Taliban and the Islamic State in Khorasan, ISIS-K. We have the Taliban led by a leader, his son carried out a suicide attack. We have an interior minister, which is actually wanted by the FBI with a $5 million bounty on his head. And we have these schools in Pakistan which are exporting extremism to Afghanistan. But however, the difference this time is that actually the Doha Accords and the United States legitimized the Taliban by holding it as a counterpart in Doha and debased the Ghani administration in Kabul. So actually, the Ghani administration in Kabul was moved out of the scene once the United States decided to hold bilateral negotiations with the Taliban. And this was before the developments in August. We have the report distributed among UN Security Council members dated to June 2021, explains and once again reiterates the connections and the ties between the Taliban and the Islamic State and the networks, and also the financial means and the income sources of the Taliban, which are actually narcotics, both trading narcotics and smuggling them, and of course, farming them. This is a report distributed on June 1st, 2020. And since August, that the Ghani administration fled from Kabul as the aftermath of the Doha arrangements, we used to have 800,000 Afghan refugees in Iran as documented ones, and there's an estimate of 2 million undocumented Afghan refugees in Iran. So that would amount to a total of nearly 3 million. And this number is rising on a daily measure. So this is a challenge for both Iran, the region, and its neighborhood, which includes the European Union. Well, so what can be done about this problem? The future, Iran and Europe could cooperate on adopting these measures, including pressuring the Taliban to form an inclusive form of government in Afghanistan, and Europe assisting in Iran in regarding the food security in Afghanistan. As you know, the humanitarian situation has led to an estimate of 9 million people suffering from hunger. And of course, this requires financing. Otherwise, we would have refugee waves moving westwards towards Iran, through Iran towards Turkey and Syria, and towards Greece and Italy in Europe. So if this refugee wave is to be stopped, at least the formation of an inclusive government in Afghanistan and the resolvement of the food security issue, and also broader cooperation between Iran and the European Union regarding borders and security in order to tackle terrorism and violent radicalization, especially regarding the madrasas in Pakistan, and anti-narcotics are necessary. Furthermore, since the pandemic has caused unprecedented challenges globally and regionally, a COVID-19 response, an urgent one, is required in the realm of health and education. Reducing maternal mortality, since there has been a collapse of governance in Afghanistan, can be another measure the European Union can assist Iran in facilitating in Afghanistan. And of course, in order to tackle radicalization, improvement of the quality and efficiency of education is required. All of these are urgent humanitarian needs. Otherwise, there would be waves of refugees moving westwards towards Europe. And since Iran is still suffering from the circumstances and the actualization of the maximum pressure campaign, it is facing financial shortages in tackling these various and numerous problems I already enumerated. And as we all know, the European Union has allocated 10 billion euros for the cause of migration and asylum. And Turkey has already received 3 billion euros, while Iran has the border with Afghanistan and is suffering from the collapse of the state in Afghanistan. And regarding extended cooperation in a regional context, well, we could adopt a theoretical framework of neutrality zones, as Professor Heinz Gärtner has mentioned in his works. The concept of a geographic zone without nuclear weapons, and also a neutrality zone, perhaps a state which adopts an active form of foreign policy. However, there are challenges to this idea of neutrality zone that perhaps the professor could help us to find out a solution to. The Austrian model of neutrality zone is defined in negative terms as non-membership in military alliances, non-participation in foreign wars, and non-deployment of foreign troops on Austrian territory. However, since the presence of CENTCOM in the Middle East, there are obstacles towards adopting an Austrian neutrality zone because US forces are stationed in almost every single country of the Middle East, and military bases are spread across the region. So if we want to adopt the conceptual framework of neutrality zones according to the Austrian model, we must find some literally neutral territory, which is currently unavailable due to the presence of numerous American bases. And another issue regarding the sudden exit of American forces from Afghanistan and the Doha Accords is the vacuum of power, because the Americans are on a retreat in Iraq and elsewhere as well. However, they maintain a naval presence and the bases in Al Udeid and Qatar, but they don't have so many military troops in action anymore. This vacuum of power may create or fuel regional ambitions. So the European Union can promote the principle, the basic principle of international law, that is the inadmissibility of annexing territory through force. This is a principle governing principle of international law that doesn't allow the annexation of territory through force and respecting international borders. These measures could help to stabilize the region. Furthermore, the European Union can facilitate an avoiding of zero-sum gains, which would lead to a reduction of anarchy in the region. But how? This is how. A functional cooperation, as suggested by David Mitrani, is organized through a technical or functional basis rather than a territorial basis, right? We already have the platform of the GCC and Iraq and Iran. So we could have the GCC +2, and they could cooperate on technical or functional areas such as environment, energy grids, common agricultural policy, which the European Union has a lot of expertise in, health and pandemics, aviation, sustainable development, and technical and scientific agencies. Furthermore, due to the issues of climate change, cooperation regarding environment and energy grids and a common agricultural policy are vital for the region, because the Middle East will suffer some of the harshest circumstances of climate change for the coming 30 years. And we have legal platforms for the realization of this plan. Article 55 of the UN Charter promotes the conditions of stability and higher living standards and economic and social progress among nations. And we have Resolution 598 of 1987. Article 8 mentions the development of a regional arrangement in order to promote security and stability, which includes the regional players and Iraq and Iran. So we have a legal basis and a functional basis, and we have a necessity. Furthermore,
excuse me, very shortly, can you maybe finish in 2 minutes, because
sure.
We only have 15 more minutes and
sure.
Sorry.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sure, this is the last slide. We have the European experiment regarding functionalism. The European Coal and Steel Community, the Economic Community, and the European Atomic Energy Community, and perhaps at its most radical form, the Monetary Union. These were all arrangements based on functionalism. And how did it work out? It was in order to develop a working peace system in post-World War II Europe in a two-stage process. How did this two-stage process work? It was formulated as we put forward. There was a task expansion regarding each function which was defined. And furthermore, we have the spillover of this task expansion that created a working peace system in Europe, which has lasted till the very present. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much also for tackling a little bit, and I think this is also important. I mean, there has been cooperation historically, but of course, I mean, we also know there was even a very good relation between Iran and the US and Israel, I would say, until the revolution. I mean, it's always the past, and then things change. And yes, but I think, thank you very much also for bringing up all the possibilities of cooperation when it comes to the humanitarian situation, food security, addressing the needs of refugees. I mean, this is probably something where the European Union could help. Can you close the screen maybe again so that we see everyone again back? Because we still have around 15 minutes and I do not yet see a question in the Q&A chat, but I'm pretty sure that SWOBODA would like to react. But maybe I also wanted to ask if maybe Ms. FARIVAR, after hearing, because she did like the welcoming remarks, if she would like to add something. And I cannot see her right now because the screen is still there. Can you look at?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. It was really insightful, all the talks. I think actually there was a kind of invisible connection and consistency between all the talks. And I think we all agree that there is a need, an urgent need to address some of the issues that was mentioned during the session, such as climate change, security, refugees crisis in the region. And that, of course, needs further cooperation between all the parties, especially Europe and Iran. I don't want to add and raise it. Can you hear me now? So there are a few questions from my colleagues here, but of course, because we don't have enough.
I cannot hear you now. Oh, Yes, now unfortunately she disappeared, but I did get a question now, and I would like to post it. Maybe it just came in right now. Are you back?
Sorry for the interruption. Yes, there was an interruption in the connection.
Okay, we
so
can hear you.
There are a few questions from my colleagues, but of course, rather listen to comments.
I'm very sorry, the connection seems to be bad. I couldn't hear you right now, so maybe we try in 2 minutes again. But I did get a question for Heinz Gärtner from Azizullah Hatamassadeh. He says, regarding to the subject of warranty, what do you think about adding an additional clause to the JCPOA that would allow Iran to carry out high percentage enrichment if the United States withdraws from the JCPOA again? This is both a strong deterrent to the US withdrawal from the agreement, even in a Republican administration, and a sign of the Biden government's goodwill. In addition, it could be an important achievement for Mr. Raisi's administration inside Iran. Heinz, the question did go to you. Did you hear it?
Yes, I don't think it's a good idea. So, because Iran itself wants to go back to 2015 and the requirements there. So the requirement there is 3.67 degrees of enrichment. So if Iran threatens to go high enrichment in order to put pressure on the US, they would not yield. On the contrary, they would increase together with Israel the maximum pressure campaign, what they're already working on. There are working groups in the US, and what to do just in the case that just the GCPOA is not working. And the reaction of the US would not be that they yield now to an agreement, but they would put even more maximum pressure on Iran. Iran would survive, but it would not be very pleasant for Iran. So the opposite should be done, as Iran itself requests, going back to 2015 and find a technical arrangement what to do with this technical enhancement and maybe change a little bit the duration of the provisions. But maximum pressure against maximum pressure doesn't work.
Thank you, Heinz. Maybe Mrs. FARIVAR, if you have any question, please feel free to post them right now, because I don't see anyone else, any question in the chat right now. If you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. This is actually my question as well, and also was posed by one.
We cannot hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think Professor Gärtner mentioned the Plan B, the so-called Plan B, that is, if the negotiations fail, Israel try to encourage the US to attack Iran. I would like to know your opinion on that. What would there's talks of what this Plan B could be, from military response to more economic pressure on Iran. So there's a spectrum of possible responses from the US and Europe. How would European countries, especially the E3, react to that if Israel were to try to go for such options?
Maybe you, Heinz, you first, and I think Hannes also has an idea on that one. So Heinz first.
Very quickly, there's only one alternative, and the response is GCPOA. If you have a working GCPOA, you can avoid this. And if the US agrees to a new old GCPOA, Israel still will oppose Iran's nuclear program, but the US would not be on board of military strikes anymore. So Iran knows best how it feels to be under maximum pressure, even more maximum pressure, militarily strikes, economic sanctions, political sanctions, all of that, Iran will survive, but all of that is would be in the option B. So, but Israel and that's the good thing, Israel and the US agreed that it's only an option B. So still the diplomatic option is the option A. And that means Israel also said agreed that there could be a diplomatic solution for that. And the diplomatic solution is the GCPOA. No GCPOA, then all this will work out what you mentioned before.
Thank you, Heinz. Hannes, I'm pretty sure you also have an idea, but please also feel free to what you heard, because you were the first speaker, and I'm pretty sure you would like to address some of the issues raised and maybe also add. And the same is, of course, then also true for Mustafa Kamrani and SAEED, ANVARI, and Hadian. Hannes, you first.
Yeah, thank you. Just to this specific question, I don't think, at least for the moment, that the US would be part of a direct attack. But of course, it could be that it, let's say, promotes a let's free hand for Israel. And Heinz said that some logistic support would be here, but I don't think Israel needs it more. It could do it alone. Nevertheless, I fully agree with Heinz that this is not the alternative we should even consider, because I think the way must go in another direction. And I'm very grateful for the reports by the colleagues from Iran, because it shows that this is the only viable thinking for the future of Iran. Of course, we can deplore that the US had a strong power, as it was mentioned. China didn't change the power of Iran, of the US. Russia didn't change it. The European Union will not change it, because in some way they are allies. You can like it or not, but they are. So I don't think Iran can change the power of the US. Let's be honest. Is it fair? No, it's not fair, but it's a fact. And I think we should deal also with facts and not only with the question what is fair and what is not fair. I think the way out has been demonstrated by your positions. What we need in the region is a cooperation between Iran and most of the Arab countries. Isn't it strange that there's more cooperation between Israel and some of the Arab countries like the Emirates than between the Arab countries and Iran? In that way, Iran was falling back. And I think this is not good for Iran. It's not good for the peace in the whole region. Of course, there are issues like in Iraq, as was mentioned. Lebanon was left out, but also, of course, in Lebanon, there's an issue. I think the only way, and this was especially presented by the last by Mohsen Hadian, is to try what kind of cooperation can be organized between Iran and the other countries. There's already some talk about it. There's already some movement between Emirates and Iraq, for example. It's not from one day to another. Of course, I could say, let's have a new relationship between Tehran and Israel, and everything will be good. That would be, illusions to go back to the relationship between the Shah and the Israeli leadership at that time. But let's start with the Arab countries. And that, of course, will influence also the US, that will influence all the European Union, and that will influence, finally, also the attitude of Israelis, if they see there's an honest cooperation between Iran and the Emirates and other countries in the region. I fully agree that it is very unfair that Turkey gets money and Iran not. But then you have to see what conditions can be created that Iran also gets a cooperation on the refugee issue, because Iran has at least as many problems, or let's say financial problems, the question of the jobs, the question of the environment, as we said before. So I think it is a vast area of cooperation, which was quite rightly shown, And now we have to come closer to a situation where this kind of cooperation can start with all the difference we will have. But I think the key is not now to have diplomatic relations with the US or with Iran. The key is to have a very specific cooperation between Iran and the Arab countries. And that should be possible to create it in the coming years. And from that on, there can be also an improvement in the relationship to other countries. And here I think Europe and many Europeans would see the good signs and would receive the signals if Iran and some of the Arab countries can promote a stronger cooperation on vital issues like refugees, but especially of climate change, new technologies, creation of hydrogen or whatever it is. I think there's a vast area of possibilities.
Thank you, Hannes. Mustafa Kamrani, would you like to add something to what has been said, or?
Thank you again. Actually, just what everybody was saying here was actually making me just thinking that probably, as I just mentioned before, this securitizing the issue, maybe this is trying to put everything into the perspective of being a security issue. Just Hannes mentioned that we have more Arab-Israeli cooperation than we have right now, Arab-Iranian cooperation, and that would probably is one reason that we have seen, especially during the Trump era from 2016 to 2020, that actually he was always trying to actually make this closer tie in between actually Arabs and Arab state, I mean, and Israel, and trying to make it more like more Iran, like a threat to the Middle East and especially the Arab states. So that probably would explain why is this happening, and why we have the issue of this lack of cooperation in between the two states. Although before this and in the past, we have seen many actually economic benefits for both parties, actually Arab states and Iran as well. And this is what I think in this issue. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Saeed. Möchten Sie noch was dazu sagen? Fällt Ihnen noch was ein? Ja.
Danke, ja. Was ich auch also dazu sagen möchte, ist, also bezieht sich auf die Forderungen der iranischen Seite in den Verhandlungen über das Atomabkommen. Ich glaube, diese Forderungen, diese Aufforderungen, was Iran wirklich von diesen Verhandlungen will, hat zwei Seiten, die wir also parallel in Betracht ziehen sollen. Die eine ist subjektiv und die andere objektiv. Also die objektive Seite bezieht sich auf, also ganz allgemein gesehen, auf die Wirtschaft, auf die Ökonomie, auf die ökonomischen Interessen des Landes. Aber die subjektive Seite ist aus meiner Sicht die Frage der Anerkennung. Wissen Sie, was die iranische Seite also allgemein von der westlichen Seite sieht und hört, ist, dass die Interessen Irans und sogar die Anwesenheit der politischen Kräfte, die der Islamischen Republik Iran nahestehen, in dieser Region von dem Westen nicht anerkannt wird. Und eine der Errungenschaften vom Atomabkommen 2015 war, dass die die Urananreicherung vom Iran, ich glaube zum ersten Mal, von dem Sicherheitsrat der UNO und auch von der Weltgemeinschaft anerkannt wurde. Ich glaube, das ist auch wichtig als die subjektive Seite. Das ist insgesamt für Iran ist nicht nur die Frage der Interessen, sondern auch die Frage der Anerkennung. Ich bedanke mich also noch einmal bei Ihnen und bei dem Österreichischen Institut. Und vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Ich hoffe, dass mein Deutsch nicht katastrophal gewesen ist. Danke.
No, the German war perfect. Maybe very shortly, Saeed Anvari was saying that there's objective and subjective reasons behind the JCPOA as well from the Iranian point of view. One is, of course, the objective is like economy and that everything gets better also economy-wise. And the other one is about also recognition of Iran's legitimate interest and that this is also part of what is going on. Mohsen Hadian, do you have to add something? You're muted, yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. I would like to ask a question regarding neutrality zones from Professor GÄRTNER. There are obstacles because we have the Austrian model of neutrality zones was based on the absence of foreign military forces on Austrian soil during the Cold War. But this would be a sticky issue regarding the Middle East because we have the presence of US forces almost in every single state in the Middle East. How could we adopt this neutrality zone in the Middle East? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like maybe to read like one last comment we just got in the chat. He says, in addition also to what Heinz and Hannes were saying, that the regional cooperation should serve as a factor in preventing the polarization at the level of superpower relations. The regional input should be in the direction of pacifying the world, not raising the tensions at the global level. That's from Professor Plamen from Bulgaria. Thank you very much. For me, it's actually a perfect final word. I would like to thank again the Institute, the Iranian Institute for European and American Studies in Tehran. It was our first cooperation. It would, of course, be a lot nicer if we would manage to meet in person at one time and discuss like even deeper, longer terms and on an eye-to-eye basis. But let me thank you from my side. And it was a pleasure speaking with all of you. Thank you to all the speakers. But I would also like to give the floor one last time to Mrs. FARIVAR, so also to say your goodbye, and to the others, thanks a lot.
Maybe Heinz can answer the question.
But which question? That
So
was a comment.
The neutrality zone. So
oh, I'm sorry, yes. Okay,
yeah,
maybe you first answer the question on the neutrality zone.
First of all, thank you very much for reading my work and mentioning it, and it's a very good question. And also, I appreciate that you included theoretical concepts in your presentation, like functionalism. And I would say functionalism and integration theory is a high bar here in the Middle East. So if you use Karl Deutsch, the security communities based on common communication and enhanced communication, it might be to create a security community. It might be an easier first step, especially with your neighboring state, and also to avoid securitization or to mitigate the securitization. Of course, in many ways, these Abraham Accords are based on balance of power and the realist theory to create an anti-Iranian alliance as well. But you can respond with communication with Arab states in order to have to somehow weaken this aspect of the Abraham Accords and more stress the cooperative aspect. And now I come to a question. Of course, I could speak very long. And somehow, what was the Austrian case? It was linked, and Austria, in its constitution, also is the nuclear weapon-free state. So it was already in the state treaty that Austria. So it was linked nuclear weapon-free state and neutrality. And actually, it was Polish Foreign Minister Rapatsky in '57 who looked at Austria and said, "Okay, let's do it for all Central Europe." So comparing now Middle East and Central Europe, and he said, including Germany. Of course, he had in mind also German unification. So a neutrality zone linked to nuclear weapon-free zone. So a little bit, it's a hand and eye question. But in the Middle East, starting with a nuclear weapon-free zone, many steps can be taken. And actually, when I was at your institute, we already discussed this a little bit. There are possibilities, of course, the nuclear weapon-free zone, there's a stumbling block, Israel now with 5 nuclear weapons. But there are lots of possibility to create a wider zone. So from Mongolia to Africa. So actually we have Central Asia, Iran could join the Central Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. Arab states could join the Pelindava zone. So there would be a belt from Mongolia. There's a little stretch between China and Kazakhstan and Russia, but still that can be bridged down to Africa. And that point, the rationale for Israel's nuclear weapons would vanish over time. If we are surrounded by nuclear weapon-free zones, Israel has to explain why it still itself needs nuclear weapon. So that could be a step closer to a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, but also a step closer to some sort of neutrality. So neutrality, in the Austrian case, it's an ideal type of neutrality, but there are steps in between where there can be still some foreign bases and still be neutral, like Cyprus. In Cyprus, they have a British military base, and it calls itself neutral as well. A little bit, Qatar is a very similar experience. It doesn't say it's neutral, but de facto, it's acting like a neutral state, but there's still the American-British base there. So there still can steps in between, but you are definitely correct by saying nuclear weapon-free zone and neutral zones are somehow linked, but it will take time to marry them over time.
Thank you, Heinz. Yes, once again, I think we can close the session. Maybe Mrs. FARIVAR, if you want to say one last sentence, please.
Thank you, Stephanie. I would like to thank all the speakers, and regarding the response to my question about Plan B, I do hope that there would be a diplomatic solution to the issue, and I hope that the negotiations for the revival of the deal would be beneficial, and there would be a beneficial outcome for all the parties. And with that, I would also want to say that we look forward to meeting you in person in Tehran or in Vienna, and also look forward to further cooperations like this joint webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.